We often heard it said that it's very hard to pay for land and animals at the same time. While that is true, there are people out there who are accomplishing very lofty goals in the first generation of ranching.
We've seen a few cases where we've watched for, now in some cases 5 years, 4 or 5 years in a row, people have effectively increased their net worth by 50 to 100% each year. That's a pretty stout change in your net worth. I've received a number of calls from bankers who have said, this can't be right. We've never seen an increase in net worth like that.
But to do that, we first have to stop ranching to break even and start ranching for profit.
The reason the cow-calf business is basically break-even is you come down here to the bottom of this bell curve deal is the heifer calf 1,760 and the cull cow 1,650. So we have just gave away all the appreciation up to the $3,300. And so basically it's just a break-even situation.
All that and more on this episode 460 of the Working Cows podcast, brought to you by Red Summit Advisors and Remedy Animal Solutions.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows podcast, recorded exclusively in the Understanding Ag studios. Very excited to be joined today by John Haskell and Wally Olson. And we're going to talk to them about some of the lofty goals that people have been able to accomplish with good management. A lot of that centers around the idea of marketing what we produce well, being excellent in the realm of marketing. But there's more to it than that, and we're going to discuss that today with Wally Olson and John Haskell right after a word from our sponsor today, Red Summit Advisors. At Red Summit Advisors, Austin Hart doesn't guess when it comes to structuring your PRF coverage. While most agents run a handful of cookie-cutter options, Austin uses their proprietary software to analyze every grid, every coverage interval, every combination, so your policy fits your land, your rainfall history, and your operations goals. PRF and LRP insurance are about managing drought and protecting cattle prices year after year, giving your ranch a fighting chance when weather or the market doesn't cooperate. And with Red Summit Advisors, you're never left wondering. Austin gives you 24/7 access to your policy's progress, so you know exactly where you stand all season long. If you already have PRF coverage, it's worth asking, could your policy be doing more? Austin Hart is ready to take a hard look at your current policy and show you what's possible. Get started today. Visit redsummit.com/pod for 3 instant, no-obligation quotes, or call Austin directly at 307-343-5670. Red Summit makes PRF easy so you can keep your family on the land. Call Austin Hart at 307-343-5670 today. John, Wally, thanks for joining me again on the Working Cows podcast. Welcome back.
Welcome. It's great to be here.
So I've had this on my agenda for a long time, because, John, you planted a seed in my mind somewhere along the line about some of the commonalities among the highest performing businesses, and you look at a lot of businesses that kind of run the gamut from east to west, north to south, and all different kinds of enterprise mixes and those kinds of things. And so you've kind of got a good idea of what some of those businesses are doing and what the commonalities are. So what would you say are some of the commonalities among some of the businesses that seem to be making the most headway from a profitability standpoint?
The first couple are pretty easy. Mindset is always important. They tend to have a winning mindset. Almost all of them have taken the Ranching for Profit school, and almost all of them are doing a really good job applying sell-by marketing. And there are other things. We can go into those too if you want. But I think that sell by marketing piece, we have seen literally from the first year we were in business that people that are doing that well have absolutely an unfair advantage. They outperform every other business we work with by leaps and bounds.
And I think that there's a range of
Absolutely.
different ways of accomplishing those things, and a spectrum of excellent to less excellent. Less than excellent. Sell by marketing, and sell by marketers. So can you maybe flesh out what a good approach or the best approach to sell by marketing looks like?
You bet. So let me piggyback off if it's all right with ranching for profit first, because most of the time people get their business more or less straight. They get their overheads under control. They are running, sort of reasonably in line with their setting, right? Context really matters here. And if they're kind of really going against the grain of nature, if you will, they start going with it. They tend not to do things like produce a lot of their own feed. They tend to buy feed in if they use it. They tend to be more or less grass-based, that sort of thing. But then once we get into sell by, one of the interesting things to me, and this turned out again in the first few years of us being in business as a trend, is that people who apply sell by within a cow-calf context tend to really, again, just outperform the rest. You can do it in stocker business, and almost all of us, including Wally and I, when we first learned from Bud, and as I've learned from Wally, started in the stocker business. When Wally and I first met, we were both in the stocker business and really didn't have much interest in cows. What's fascinating to me, and we're really seeing it play out in this current market, is that when you have a cow-calf enterprise and you apply sell-by principles within that, you have this fantastic cost control, which we don't get in the stocker business, right? When the price of stockers goes up, well, the sale price goes up, but the replacement price goes up too, right? Your buyback gets more expensive. With cows, we have effectively fixed our production cost. So my cost to produce a heifer in 2019 compared to the cost to produce a heifer calf, out of a cow in 2025 is not that different. It's different, but not as, not the threefold difference like the buyback right now with a 6-weight stocker would be. And so that gives cow-calf people, again, kind of an unfair advantage. They know what their costs are at the bottom of the market. They know what their costs are at the top of the market. And if they can be profitable at the bottom of the market, well, when you hit the top of the market, that price increase is all gravy. And I've emphasized this point a few times. As we go through classes like Ranching for Profit, and as we think about managing our business, most people start on the cost side. And that's not a bad place for people to start, but we shouldn't stay there too long. Well, and I think we've talked about this on this podcast before. We get our costs under control and get them reasonable. Then we really need to start talking about gross product. How big can we get our gross product given our circumstances? And with the same number of overheads. And the reason that is, and without having a massive impact on our direct costs, assume we can do that and keep our direct costs at about the same ratio. They're going to go up, obviously, but we're going to try to keep that ratio similar. The thing that does when I add gross product or I add additional revenue at the top line through things like marketing, and there's no increase in direct costs and no increase in overheads, that new money basically flows directly to the bottom line. And that is what makes those businesses that apply good marketing so much more profitable. If I can sell my steers for $100 more per head with all of the same production costs, I literally add $100 more to the bottom line for every animal I do that with. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so when we apply a tool like sell by marketing and use it to really increase our gross product while keeping our asset base basically the same, all that new income goes straight to the bottom line.
And it's interesting to hear you say that about the cow-calf and the sell-by marketing, because when my dad went through and was taught sell-by marketing by Bud Williams in Cheyenne, Wyoming in the late 90s, early 2000s,
Yeah.
Bud said in the class, this works better the farther east and south you go because there's more opportunities to buy undervalued animals, be it a bull calf or, small groups, and put them into bigger groups and then resell them as larger groups of the same kind. And he said this works better. And what my dad said, Bud said, was this doesn't work as well the farther north and west you go because the farther north and west you go, the better the management gets. And what you're saying is we're learning how to apply sell-by marketing in the cow-calf sector as well. Am I understanding what you're saying correctly?
Well, I'd say actually both of those things are true. And Wally, you've said this multiple times. I think you just said it this morning on our weekly call, right? That as you go to places where there's better and better management, right, there's a little more compressing. Not that the opportunities don't exist to apply sell-by marketing, but you get rid of some of the real big outliers, right? In the South.
It's not quite as easy. You just don't have the cattle, and you just
the volume.
And everybody, it takes, you're just too good of managers.
So for example,
I mean, to put it in perspective, I think, Wally, you've told me you can go to Joplin, Missouri and buy a semi-load of uncut bull calves every week. Is that right?
Yep, every Monday.
And like, I'm not kidding. I think in Belfouche, St. Ange, Faith, Phillip, you'd be lucky 1 in 10,000. You'd be lucky 1 in 10,000 to buy an uncut bull calf in those markets. And I was just telling Wally before we got on here today was that now on the last market report when I was showing my son how to do cattle squares, that there's 5 uncut bull calves in one small sale. I'm like, hey, here you go. These guys are going to pay you to make these into steers, And so, anyways. Back to the cow-calf, though.
I would like to
that's
say
good.
Thing about the change in marketing. When I would go down and spend weekends with Bud Williams, and every weekend I went, he had an agenda. He was going to teach me something. One weekend it was how to make money in the cow-calf business because I was a stalker guy, And let me tell you what, when he got done with me that weekend, it has turned out to be it would be interesting to figure out, what that weekend was worth to me, but it was in millions of dollars, I would say. It's just, now that I think back on it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, phenomenal.
Okay,
it's unbelievable as I think about it, how it's changed.
Yeah. Can you set the context then and help me understand or lay out a scenario for applying sell-by marketing in the cow-calf business?
Well, what you need to be looking at is the relationship between what you have on inventory. You understand what I'm saying? And if it's all right, we'll go through this cow bell curve now. There's cows are there's this, we're using $3,300 in this example, but there's $4,000 and $5,000 cows out there now, but if you compare the heifer calf, you understand what I'm saying? And you can buy a heifer calf in this example for $1,760. And so you compare that, subtract that from the bred cow at $3,300, you have $1,540 left over cash. You have a heifer calf and cash. You have traded off the bred cow. So you need to make that heifer calf into a bred cow or a bred heifer. And so you put $700 with that. So now you have what, $2,460? I'm doing this math in my head. And plus, $900 in cash, about something like that. And
yes, sir.
And so and you got to understand what this bred cow is. If this bred cow is a 3 or 4 year old cow, I'm not near as excited about selling her as if she's a 5 or 6 or whatever year old cow that is going to start to depreciate in value. And so you need to understand that. And that's to me, that is the simplest thing. I mean, there's not much you can do to raise the value of your steer calves. I mean, you can do stuff, but I mean, not much. And everybody talks about steer calf. Heifer calves are the inventory of your breeding herd is where you can really benefit from. And the reason the cow-calf business is basically break even is you come down here to the bottom of this bell curve deal is the heifer calf 1,760 and the cull cow 1,650. So we have just gave away all the appreciation up to the $3,300. And so basically it's just a break even situation.
Yep. Yes.
So this
Actually losing $110.
Right. This and paying to do it along the way, right? Hopefully you've gotten some cash flow in the middle. This brings up a couple of really important points. The first is that we need to reorient our cow-calf system and think much more carefully about the different segments of the inventory. So we think about our calves, our cows, by age class. And we understand that how the value of those age classes changes. Now, the change can be different, right? It kind of follows a pattern over time, but it can vary. And what you really need to understand is how moving your inventory from overvalued classes to undervalued classes really impacts your balance sheet and impacts your cash flow.
Negatively.
Well,
when you're going from overvalued to undervalued.
Could be negative, could be positive. So generally, when you're going to overvalued to undervalued, you're affecting your cash flow positively. You may impact your balance sheet negatively, but usually the cash flow benefit is so much better.
I'm thinking about holding on to an undervalued animal so long that they become, or an overvalued animal so long that they become undervalued.
If you hold from overvalued to undervalued, you lose, right? That's that $110, that you talked about, negative 110. But if you sell those and capitalize on that and then go purchase back undervalued, then you create cash flow and you often hold your balance sheet. There's a lot of worry in this. And this came up a lot in the class we just did in Sheridan last month. Well, we're just devaluing our balance sheet constantly. Well, kind of, but that's not how it really works. Generally, what we see is the balance sheet value continues to walk forward. And the way it walks forward is primarily through retained earnings, not just through appreciation. So in the graph that Wally's got here, you could, if this was a multi-year process, which it usually is, right? 1 year you could show at the end of the year, your breeding stock inventory is the value of this heifer calf. And then the next year it's 3,300, and then, which is the bred cow. And then 5 years later, 6 years later, 7 years later, you're down to a cull cow at $1,600. Okay. Those age classes have a time sequence, sort of implied in them, right? If you just ride that from the top to the bottom, you may increase your balance sheet in the middle and then have it drop off again. Okay. But if we capture this as retained earnings, we actually convert it to cash and purchase back, that goes into the bottom of our balance sheet, if you will, and allows us to continue progressing even while the market value of our livestock is going down. Kind of assumes we're holding our inventory to get, we're holding a reasonably similar inventory in terms of head count. Right. But because we are generating that cash that Wally's talking about, we are able to we're building net income, right? Building gross product, and that builds our balance sheet through another channel. Now, I had a guy recently say to me, and I'll confess it was a funny thing at the time. He says, well, my balance sheet doesn't have retained earnings on it. Well, I think that's true for a lot of people. Yeah. That is the common situation. But if your balance sheet doesn't have retained earnings on it, we have a real problem. And what we need to do is build that up, because it is, lots of us talk about the increase in asset value, and it happens with real estate, right? It happens with livestock. It happens with all kinds of things. It happened during the pandemic with equipment. But if we don't actually convert that to cash and replace it, we haven't really done anything. We've just ridden the market up. And when the market goes down, we're going to ride that market back down. Row crop farmers have a real disadvantage in this world in that they really can't do that, right? There is much less segmentation within their inventory. So I have a crop of, number one corn. It's all, there's a little bit of junk that has to get sorted off, but I mean, it's all kind of number one corn. When I look at a herd of 300 cows, the beauty of this system is that I have a lot of different products I can sell at that herd. When Wally talks about adding value to females, right? Think of all the different ways you can sell a female, right? Think of all the different conditions she could be in. She could be that heifer calf. She could be a heifer calf ready to breed. She could be exposed. She could be confirmed pregnant. She can be open. She can be a 2-year-old cow, 3-year-old cow, 4-year-old cow, 5-year-old cow, all the way up. And then add whatever other pluses and minuses you want to on her. She could be black, red, etc. But all of those different things that you can have in a cow herd allows you to keep a very simple management system, right? I can manage a 300 cow herd as one unit and very easily take care of my grass, right, by managing it as one unit throughout the year, and yet have 5 or 6 different products that I could sell, and which gives me an opportunity to look for differentiations, right, to look for overvalued and look for undervalued within that very simple management complex. Problem for most of us is we get to preg check time and they're either open or they're pregnant. And we don't pay any attention to any of the rest of this stuff. And I'm a huge fan of year branding cows for year branding heifers, right? Or year branding them when they're confirmed pregnant, so that I have, then when we do our preg check, we actually maintain the inventory so we know how many pregnant 4-year-olds, how many pregnant 5-year-olds, how many pregnant 6-year-olds, because likely there's a difference in those values, and we're going to look at ways to generate additional income from that. We wind up becoming a female seed stock producer. And that's the mindset part that has to be different, because we are trying to sell very high quality animals to other people that are highly desirable and for which they will pay a premium. And if we're willing to segment our management or segment our inventory those ways, we can really analyze it well.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Remedy Animal Solutions. Are you plagued with respiratory infections, pink eye, too many open cattle, lice, high vet and drug bills? Let Remedy Animal Solutions help you transition to a drug and vax-free system with their protocols. Prevention is way better than medicating. Let them show you how to be more effective, spend less, and do less work doctoring using their effective formulas sprayed on salt for prevention or intranasally for treatment, never needing a drug or needle. Consumer demand for clean meat is high. Remedy Animal Solutions can give you customized advice by calling them to get your concerns and challenges resolved. Their natural and organically qualified products have no holdback time or culls when treated. For listeners of the Working Cows podcast, you can get $200 off your complete first aid kit for quick treatment options on the spot. Consider listening to both of our previous episodes with Ellen Bench of Remedy Animal Solutions on the Working Cows podcast to get more information about how to integrate these options into your operation.
The same thing can be done on the open cow side
Absolutely.
if you know their ages, and I think this would be a great business for a young man in the north to develop in the fall. Go around and pick up everybody's open cows that they just hate and want to get rid of, and bring them home and work through them. And the young cows first, some of them are still going to be bred.
20%.
I wasn't going there. Yeah,
I will. I've had lots
we had a sheep that lambed in July or August, first week in August, and one of our neighbors said, when my sheep lamb in the first week of August, I just say, hey, my opens are lambing.
It's fun when your opens calves.
Yeah,
It's nice.
But back to you can create so much more income, or by managing those culls. But most people just got to get rid of them. Between them and the cut calves, everybody just got to get rid of them, and you can really benefit significantly, because 6 months of feed, you can take an open cow or a colt or a young open cow, and all of a sudden now have a really nice bred cow to sell. Man.
Not even 6 months if you're in the north. You can preg check him in November, turn a bull in with him the next day, and preg check him in February.
Yep.
And sell him in March.
Yeah. So can you give me some examples, maybe even some real world examples of what people are able to accomplish by applying these principles, sell by, and even if you want to be as specific as saying people who are applying cow-calf, sell by to cow-calf enterprises, some of the lofty goals they've been able to accomplish in real time?
One I know is I have a brother-in-law that changed over to rapid turnover in his cow herd, or whatever you want to call it. But he did not change his inventory value hardly at all. But he increased his sales by, I think, 52%. and that was with no. I mean, there's no. You don't have to go spend $250,000 on some capital improvement. It's just changing your mindset.
And I think in all of those, what I want to emphasize here, because Wally Olson is kind of a dirty trader, and we all have to wash our hands after we shake his hand, right?
Oh.
But
everybody else is John. Everybody else is just a clean trader.
That's exactly.
Everybody's a cow trader. Wally's just good at it.
Yeah,
is that right, Wally?
Yeah. Everybody trades cows, and some of them aren't quite as good as they should be. What's that?
less excellent, or less than excellent, I think you said. Anyway, long story short, what I want people to not have in their mind is that we're dealing with cows that have 7 brands on them that have been through every sale barn in our part of the world that are 17 different colors and shapes and sizes. You can do this in a super high quality closed herd, right? Whereby you retain heifers. All you're doing is accelerating the turnover in that herd. So you're getting, instead of keeping those cows until they're open or dead, you are selling them when they still have a lot of value. And generally, if you think about it, a lot of people keep, 20 to 50% of their heifers. This goes along with, there are a few other pieces to this if we're going to do it in a cow-calf setting. One is you better be good at keeping heifers, and you're probably going to keep 90% of your heifers or 80% of your heifers. You're going to keep a very large number, and you're going to let the bull tell you which ones are the most fertile. You've had Burke on to talk about that. Burke was one of the early advocates of that genetic approach. What's fascinating to me about that is it leads to a wonderful market opportunity. I've done this multiple times. You can run a simulation with different preg rates and different cull rates and where you sell. But if you don't keep any cows past 5 or 6 years old, you can generally raise enough. If your animal performance is good enough, you can raise enough heifers and have a low enough heifer conception rate that you have a good number of opens to sell. You're selecting only the most fertile heifers to go in as cows, and you can maintain that as a closed herd. And I will, and look, we know people that do this, right? John Maddox would be a good example, right? Of people that keep a young herd and they sell older cows that are highly coveted in the market, right? Because those cows, as 5 or 6 year old cows, have been there, done that. They can make, you can sell those to somebody else and they trust that they will do very well. So I want this to be, Wally lives in Oklahoma where a multi-owner cow is an acceptable thing. In our part of the world, that is less acceptable. Okay. But there's no reason why we're not talking sale barn cows. We can be talking top of the line cows. The interesting thing, and Wally really turned me onto this a number of years ago, and it absolutely makes sense. If you know anything about statistics, is that if you look at the demographics of a cow herd, those older cows are really not that many in your herd. There are older cows in your herd, right? I remember I worked for a guy at one point who was very interested in cow longevity. That was a big topic. He still is. I remember the first time I put a 22-year-old cow on a truck because that was the first time she came up open, right? That's pretty cool. But I remember the one, and that was that ranch had thousands of cows, right? Now, even going into the teens, what we see is, if you're 80 to 90% open, as you get into those older weight classes, those cows are falling out quickly anyway. So they're not actually a big component of your herd. If they're 20 or 25% of your total herd, that's really high. They're often less than that. And so by giving up keeping those older cows, you're not giving up that much, but what you gain by capturing the appreciation is much bigger. And if you will increase the number of heifers you keep, your fertility, everything, you're selecting for the highest fertility, et cetera. So your herd performance should not decrease.
But John, they paid extra because that cow had never missed in 22 breeding cycles. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they paid extra.
Feel sorry for the sucker that ate the steaks off her, right?
One thing.
Man, this roast is
That's beyond Vaca Vieja.
One thing.
We're not French. We already established this. Sorry.
Yeah.
One thing I would like to say about that, people talk about how, a cow isn't paid for till she's 8 years old. And what that is I finally found it is why they come up with it is they put the depreciation on the cows that on the
front end,
on the
linear depreciation,
front end of the cows, and they put the depreciation on, on the 2-year-old cow and the 3-year-old cow and the 4-year-old cow and the 5-year-old cow. And that's straight line, depreciation, which that isn't the way it happens. And I've come up with the word, where is the point of the depreciation happening? And it is on the 5, 6, 7, depending on where it's at, year-old cows. And that's where it needs to go. And I promise you, at that point, that 8-year-old cow isn't all that profitable. And another thing is everybody talks about longevity and knowing the ranch and, indigenous knowledge. Okay, if a heifer calf was born there, raised there, bred there, had a calf, and raised the calf and did it a couple of times, she's probably got as 99.9% of the indigenous knowledge of John Haskell's 22-year-old cow. So that doesn't cut it with me. And then on the good old granny cows that the breed every year and all this. Well, to me, if you have a cow that bred as a second calf cow and then is bred for 3 or 4 years, you have captured most of the reproductive performance. And besides that,
I think I've heard you say, Wally, many times, you're not against owning old cows. You're just against making old cows.
Correct.
Is that right?
That is absolutely right. I always own some old cows, usually. So,
they can be a great buy. Even this year, you've been able to buy older cows for $1,900 pregnant. Like, man,
right.
It's going to raise
that. And that gal, the young heifer, a lot of the longevity guys say, well, we leave them on until they're 10 months old because it helps develop the rumen and all these other things. Yeah, well, she also got all the mentoring she probably needed in that 10 months of, hey, don't eat that. That will make you not feel good for a long time or it will kill you, And so, I think we get a lot of that. Like you said, you get 99% of that knowledge of the ranch in the first maybe even year or less.
That's
so
correct.
And remember, they're gaining knowledge in utero. That's been shown multiple times.
Yeah.
And I'll just add, Wally and I are both good friends with Fred Provenza, so we are not contradicting anything he's saying here. So
right.
Let me give you one other quick example of that. You mentioned the 10-month weaning thing. The first group of calves that I weaned at the end of March that were born in May, was absolutely amazing. I was terrified to do it. We finally did it. We fence line weaned them. And literally the first day after weaning, those calves covered a pasture like a group of cows. Like they just, you wean spring-born calves in September kind of thing, and they kind of ball around and travel around like calves and act like numbskulls. Those calves, just nothing to it, spread out over the whole pasture, covered all the corners, knew where the water was. And when we moved them to the next pasture, they moved just as easily as anything, just as easily as a set of cows, and just kept right on going. Like there was no break for those calves. It was remarkable. Yeah.
No, that's great. So, John, did you give an example? Wally gave his example of his brother-in-law, 52% increase. Did you give an example as well of people applying these things?
Yeah, let me talk about a few sort of more practical examples that are not based on the rate of return, but which kind of are. The rate of return is implied. We've dealt with a number of customers who have completely gotten themselves off of operating debt. So they have paid off their line of credit and generated enough cash that they don't need a line of credit anymore. They may use one, but they don't need one. So we've got a couple of customers who, about the time February rolls around, they sell a set of cows, they have no more operating debt. And they continue to operate that way year after year. We have a number of customers who have sort of made their life so comfortable in terms of servicing their long-term debt, they've been plenty willing to take on more. We've had customers that have expanded their cow herds with cash. We've had them expand it with term debt, but again, very comfortably. We look a lot at term debt coverage, which is your ability to service the long-term debt that you have. We tend to look for a number where your net income or your total profit, if you will, for the year is at least twice your total debt payments. So if I have a $100,000 payment on the ranch, I want $200,000 in profit so that I can service that comfortably. And we've seen a lot of that. And then finally, in my mind, the pinnacle of for most people is we have literally seen people that are buying land with the proceeds from their cow operation. There are no oil wells involved, no outside income. It's usually a husband and wife team. Wife stays home, takes care of the kids, also helps on the ranch. Husband works on the ranch full time, but they are able to buy property. Now, we very much are doing that in a bit of a leveraged way. So it's not necessarily, acre by acre. But if you think of, we have a base property of, 500 acres and we have lease property of 1,000 acres. And then we add another, 500 acres of lease ground and another 500 acre of purchased ground. Yeah. Thank you. We're sort of leveraging our way into that and with lease ground also. But those payments, interestingly enough, can be very, very comfortable. So the idea that you can't, Allen Nation describes, I think, a very good program for how to buy land with an ag operation. And what we've seen is we can massively accelerate that.
Very good. Well,
we've seen a couple of cases. Sorry, one more thing, just to give you examples. We've seen a few cases where we've watched for, now in some cases 4 or 5 years in a row, people have effectively increased their net worth by 50 to 100% each year. And that's a pretty stout change in your net worth. I've received a number of calls from bankers who have said, this can't be right. We've never seen an increase in net worth like that. And it's like, well, that's what it really is. So sorry. And we go through it with them and why. But this idea that, and boy, even just a few years ago, when you could buy a bred cow for $1,200 or $1,300 in places in the West that were kind of dry, if you had grass for those and could sell a calf off of her and then sell a bred cow, I mean, that's a money printing machine. So again, we see it in stockers, but it's way better in cow-calf. And I think the other thing that the cow-calf deal adds is that the risk in cow-calf, especially if you're doing it a little more internally, is lower. We just don't see the disease and death risk with cows that we see with stockers. Not that it doesn't happen. Wally and I have both been privy to an experience with significant death loss in cows. But it is not as, stockers, everybody's been through a mycoplasma outbreak if you run stockers long enough. Everybody's run into anaplas. If you run sheep, heaven forbid, you're going to run into something. Cows are pretty easy to keep alive. Most of us can at least get that done. So when you take out that part, then these upsides that we see are really, really positive.
Is this part of what you guys are talking about at the Sim to Win events? And I have a testimonial here, unprovoked by either one of you, a listener, a friend, one of the guys who I count among some of the better managers in Western South Dakota, went to the Sim to Win event in Sheridan, and he texted me, said, just finished the sell-by school in Sheridan. Sure, it was all that and more, right? Wally was there, did a presentation, offered insight. He said the school was excellent. So this is kind of what you guys are talking about there?
This is absolutely, yes.
That is what we're talking about.
Can you give me a breakdown of kind of how those schools flow and what they're all about?
You bet. So we've taken Wally's old sell-by curriculum and we've tried to upgrade it a little bit, make it a little modern. Bud started teaching this in the 90s, I think, right?
Yep.
And did a good job. Ann Barnhart taught for a while after Bud. Wally picked up as Ann Barnhart was kind of leaving the scene. Doug Ferguson teaches this. We have a couple of main goals in this, and we're trying to be pretty data driven as we teach this. The first thing I'll just say is that we know the importance. And we have to cover the basics. The foundation of this is really important. Like low-stress stockmanship, low-stress horsemanship, whatever, everybody thinks they know what it is, but you really have to get in and take the school and really digest the information to really understand it. It's not as simple as everybody thinks it is. But there's a strong foundation there if we get that foundation laid. The first class we do is focused on stockers because the calculations are the easiest. You're dealing with kind of one animal at a time. It just stockers are easy. And interestingly, that's how Bud started teaching it, right? Because it's pretty easy to explain the concept of value of gain with a stalker calf. The second class is much more focused on the cow-calf enterprise. And once we've established the foundation with stockers, then we can go to cow-calf. But I want to back up to the first stocker school and also part two, the cow-calf school, or this second part where we get into a little more nuance.
And are these happening during the same event?
No,
these
these
are separate schools. So
separate schools.
3-day school 1 is Stockers, 3-day school 2 is right.
And strongly recommend you do the 1 before the 2. Even if you're a cow-calf person, still go to the Stocker school because that's where the foundation gets laid.
And
Sorry,
one thing that I have found with and I visited with Bud lots about this and stuff is you cannot go to one school and get it because it just
unless you're some kind of savant. Yeah,
well, even a savant, but and you got to go, at least 1 or 2 schools to even come close to getting it. And what we've designed this, like I compare this, you've been to Olson Ranch, Wallace Olson marketing schools like a Model T putting down the road, and you come to the sim event with these guys that have developed this. It's like a Lamborghini. It is. And so I would, like I said, and I don't know where you can invest, the money and have a higher return, I mean, I'm serious and stuff.
So one of the things we got really interested in was what happens after people take a school. And we've talked about this with regards to ranching for profit, with regard to sell by marketing, a whole bunch of other things. And there really is sort of the problem of you go to a school, you get excited, you go home, and then you don't actually do anything. And one of the reasons we've focused on, we call these sim to win. One of the reasons we got interested in this is because our friend Bob Palmer, who teaches our Zone Rancher course, has really introduced us to this idea of pressured practice. And I've thought a lot about how I learn. And for example, when I was doing math in high school, I was terrible to the point that I couldn't hardly do it. And I wound up actually getting a degree in math in college. And the way I made the difference was I literally did tons of practice problems. And there are a couple of different ways you can do practice problems. Just doing practice problems is a huge advantage, and we do a lot of that in the school. But the other part that we really have to incorporate is when things go badly in the market, we are not at our best, right? We are likely to make bad decisions because we panic, because we're worried, because we're not sleeping well, etc. And just like anybody that's in the military or law enforcement or anything like that, trains under some sort of, simulated reality type experience. Pilots do this, right? How can we make the scenario as real as possible so that people are prepared for the emotional consequences as well as the, sort of intellectual consequences of what happens when the market makes big changes? Our friend Cinnamon, who we're partnered with, Cinnamon Lenhart from Gillette, she is an integral part of this. She has a real background in education and how to teach people, right? How to get information out of a piece of paper and into your head, and then really out through your head down to your feet or your hands or whatever is actually going to do the work, right? So when we think about teaching someone, it is what I've seen over and over again is it's not enough to know it. You have to really be at that level where you can apply it. And so the reason for the simulations are that we create situations and we, try to get a little creative and sort of how to create pressure. But what I want your heart rate up while you're trying to do math, right? I want your heart rate up while you're looking at a sale report, because then when your heart rate actually is up, because of the realities of the market, because your bankers called you 5 times that week, your blood pressure's up, you actually have been there before. That's a familiar context. And to me, it's a huge difference in how we need people to learn if we expect them to really apply this in the real world. We've heard this from customers multiple times. I've taken all the classes. I know the stuff, and yet I find myself not applying it. Josh Ducart from North Dakota was the person I think that articulated this the absolute best to me, where, we'd been friends for a while, and he had said, I am frustrated with my inability to apply this. What is the difference? What is the difference from understanding it on paper and understanding it out of a book versus doing it in real life? And that's something that Bob Palmer clarified for me a great deal. So he does things where, he, for example, will have you do physical exercise. So jump down and do 20 burpees and then get up and try to think through how you're going to have a conversation with your family, like your heart rate literally is up, right? He's a former karate instructor, right? So again, when somebody's whacking you with a stick about the 3rd time and you need to think about how to respond, right? Your blood pressure's up, your adrenaline's up, your heart rate's up. We want that practice for people, because when the market falls, it it goes up. I mean, it's gone up ridiculously fast this year, but generally it goes up slowly and then it falls really quickly. And there are highly charged emotions on both sides. And it is hard to believe, but those emotions have been shown over and over again to decrease people's cognitive ability. And what they do more than anything is cause people to freeze up. And Wally, you've said a million times, the worst possible thing you can do when markets are changing rapidly is freeze up.
Well, and honestly, I mean, part of success in sell by marketing is being able to stick to a plan when you go to the sale barn and there's an emotional, whatever bidding takes place, and it's tempting to bid, 1, 2, 5 times more than you should have.
Yep.
Right.
And look, sale barns are designed for that, right? That's the whole purpose of the sale barn environment, is to cause you a little bit of confusion. How many of us have made bad decisions in sale barns? Like, we've all done it. And yet, those guys that have been going to sale barns for 40 years, it doesn't bug them. They don't even hear it. It's just noise.
Yep. So, I mean, it's helping in those environments, but it's also helping in like you said, the high pressure environment your bankers called 3 times this week and all these other things, right?
Yep. I had a wonderful experience years ago where I was overdrawn on my checking account by about $150,000. I was right in the middle of a lawsuit, and some other thing was going on, and it was like, there were no good decisions being made at that point.
Yes, right.
I had a bunch of stalkers that I was placing on water and had been going well all summer until that week, and then I couldn't get them to stay anywhere.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, the cows are never out when I'm home. It's only when I go away on a trip that my wife says, "Hey, the water's broke and the cows are out." I said, "Well,
they knew.
I know it's rotational grazing, and sometimes that happens at the neighbors, but we try to avoid that as much as possible." So, all right. What else did you want to cover? What else are we needing to cover here on this episode?
Well, one thing I would say, the most important thing I learned from Bud Williams is to be prepared. Start now when you've got opportunities to prepare yourself. To go through. There's people that are so worried about the market, or the price, and it doesn't really matter except the day you start and the day you stop, and the rest is just the relationships of the market. So prepare yourself for this. Matter of fact, when in the break of 2014, I was a lot better off at the bottom in 2016 than I was going in 2014, So,
because you applied these principles.
Because I applied these principles. I harvested the cash out of the business, and stuff. So, just work at preparing yourself, and
and I think there are two sides to this. One is prepare yourself against freezing up, but also prepare yourself against two other things, really. Sticker shock, which is what most people are encountering right now, right? $5,000 for a bred cow. 2 years ago, I could buy her for $1,600. Like, yeah. Doesn't matter. Sticker shock is real, right? It's causing a lot of people to just make bad decisions. But there's one other thing that we're seeing a little bit of, and this makes me very nervous, is we see people that get cocky because they've got a bunch of money in their pocket right now. And this is not the time to do that, because if you do that right now, you will get the stuffing absolutely knocked out of you. So if you are taking on long-term debt obligations right now, that's a very bad idea, right? If you are thinking, "Oh, I've got this figured out," if you've ever heard yourself say, "Maybe this is a new normal," like, no, that is not correct. We are going to sell. I'm going to be buying $600 heifers at some time in the next few years, right? I don't know when. There's no guarantee that the market's going to fall tomorrow. It could go up another $1.20 or $120 just like it did this year. Neither of those things are guaranteed. But when you have extra money, please especially these cow-calf guys, make sure you're using it well. Use it wisely. Use it for things that generate more revenue. Don't let your lifestyle creep ahead to the point that it makes it harder for you to be profitable at the bottom of the market. Don't forget that these $2,200 heifers will be worth $600 at some point.
I'll say 2 things in regard to that. It's a lot like rain. When it rains, you will look like a genius. Absolutely. As it relates to grass management. When it doesn't, you'll look like an idiot. And neither one of those things is actually true.
Correct.
And the second thing I'll say about that is there's a principle in Austrian economics is when they start to build the biggest building in your town, prepare for the pop in the bubble.
Yep.
And we're seeing a lot of places with new record tall buildings, or another principle is the biggest cruise ship. When they build the biggest cruise ship, the next biggest cruise ship in the world is built, prepare for the bubble to pop. And so I think
the problem,
those
like
are
so
things,
many things, is we do not know when, where there is no way to predict what's going to happen in the market next week, let alone tomorrow, let alone next year. You don't know. And as Wally said earlier, don't act like you know, because you can look at the historical chart. That is not tomorrow. That is completely irrelevant. We have an overvalued sense of our ability to predict the future. We always prove ourselves wrong.
I've heard a wise man somewhere say frequently, deal with today.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I don't know about wise.
Okay.
Wise guy. How about that?
Yeah. Okay. So my son's been sitting here this whole time, dutifully taking notes, and I told him I'd give him a chance to ask you guys a question here as we point towards wrapping up. So I'm going to let him fire away.
I guess one of the things you talked about was being profitable at the bottom of the market. Could you maybe talk about that a little bit more and explain that, I guess?
As the market goes down, you just keep trading. And like I said, locking up here, if you lock up, you're out of business. And you just keep trading. And as you go down, you're harvesting cash. And then you're being able to buy back cheaper. You know, from 2014 and 15, I was buying or keeping. I was keeping and then I was buying $1,200 heifers. In 2016, I could only sell a bred heifer for $1,600 or $1,500, and I had $1,460 in her. You know, and any good cowman would say, "Oh hell, I ain't no way I'm going to sell that for that." You know, but that's looking back. You always got to be looking forward. Because I was able to buy a $685 heifer, so I had worked the business down from $2,900 or $3,000 cows to $1,050 bred heifers, you know, and I had built up lots of cash. So at the bottom, I could really expand because I had the cash to do it.
I think that's such an important point, that mindset of, well, I can't sell her for $1,500 because I've got $1,460 in her. That's looking back. If you're dealing with today, I can sell her for $1,500 and buy two unbred heifers back for $680 a piece and still have money in my pocket. That's a helpful thing. He's got one more question here I want him to ask.
The other thing is this lifestyle overhead creep thing. Keep your costs low. You don't have to be ridiculous, but the lower you can keep your costs, the easier it is for you to be profitable at low points in the market. And again, the lower you keep your costs in my world, the more you can invest in things that actually produce money. Right? So if I have low fence costs, if I have low land costs, if I have low labor costs, if I have extra money, I'd rather put it into livestock.
So the other question I had is, how many turns a year are you making?
It depends on the structure of the business. I'm not in it anymore, but I was in one business where we were buying big cutting bulls, and they were supposed to be getting turned, every 60 days, which is 6 turns a year. And
they've never turned in 60 days. I'll just tell you that. But
what's that? Some of them
miss it by half, and it kind of works.
but the turns, if you do, it will depend on where you're at. I mean, if you're a grazing person, 1 or 2 turns, or 2 turns a year is a very good goal to have, I would say, and you can kick it up. And if you got a grow yard or something, you can really ramp up the turns. I mean,
Yeah, I can't remember. I was talking to Lee and Art McElroy, and I think they said that they usually do 2 turns a year, and they're in a grass situation. But this year they were shooting for 3 or 4, maybe. So just kind of depends on the year.
And one thing, you could stage it just like right now we're buying some heifers we're going to breed for fall calving cows. We're going to sell them in April, you understand what I'm saying? And we'll buy back something to graze, and then we'll probably buy, I don't know what we'll do, but it's easy to get 2 turns a year. It gets tough when you ramp it just depends on what your resources are.
If we're in a cow-calf context, and I talk about that internal replacement within a cow-calf herd, think about selling May-calving cows, for example, in the northern part of the country in February, right? That's a, that might be 5 and 6 year old cows, 4, 5 and 6 year old cows, let's just say, but that's going to add cash flow after the first of the year. And then you have a steer calf crop to sell in the fall. So it may not be as clear as a group going out, a group coming in, but really thinking about how do you increase cash flow at different times of the year can be very, very important. That said, I know of a guy over east of us who runs 200 cows. And he literally turns them over 4 times a year. He buys 4 sets of cows a year, buys them, sells them, buys them, sells them. He averages $500 per turn.
Per animal.
How many cows does it take to support your family if you're making $2,000 per cow? That's a pretty good profit per cow, right? Like 200 cows is a pretty good living. So.
And one other thing I want to point out on the cow business, and a lot of people get after me for, talking about taxes and stuff, but to create wealth, and after-tax dollars, if you make the same amount of money in the stocker business, or comparing, you have to make about 35% more in the stocker business than the cow business. Correct me if I'm wrong, John Haskell.
It's about right.
Just
to keep the same amount at the end.
Keep the same amount because
it's a lot like being a W-2 employee.
Yeah, because it's being, because of capital gains rate and then self-employment tax. But you got to address who's going to manage your retirement. If you aren't paying into Social Security, and I worked for the Kelly Ranch for many years, and, I truly I appreciate you younger people supporting me now. So,
Oh no, they put your money in a lockbox, remember?
I was going to say we should probably wrap up before we get John started on Social Security. Yeah. So I think I have an idea about how he feels about that. But
I will say this: if you are on a farm or a ranch that is showing no net income consistently year after year, and you have not built up 10 quarters of Social Security qualified earnings, I strongly recommend that people do that. So whether you choose to pay in voluntarily or you actually have it, that's fine. But or you've had a job at some point, like in college or something, I do strongly recommend. And the biggest reason is for the disability program. We know lots of people who have had something terrible happen in some sort of ag-related accident and who have been able to actually use Social Security disability income to help their situation. I wish there was a better system. I'll just say that. There are lots of things we can improve about the federal government and everything it touches, but we have that as part of our system. It is worth using it for the cost.
Yep. And staying out of it in protest is kind of like saying I'm not going to sell that heifer because I've got $1,460 in her. Well, this is the game we're playing. It's not the game that you wish you were playing. This is the game we're playing.
Yep. Yep. Very good. Good. Great questions.
All right. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate the time. Anything else major that you wanted to say before we wrap up here today?
Couple of quick items I want to make sure people are aware of. Monday mornings at 6:30 on the ranching.fyi forums, we do a market call. It's 1 hour from 6:30 Mountain to 7:30 Mountain, which is 7:30 Central, 8:30. You can do the math. But that's a 1 hour call. If you have questions, please bring them. We also, FYI has a set of what are called forums, which are sort of old school online discussion forums. So if you have questions, you can get on there, type them out. Brian and Wally and Cinnamon monitor those. We also have a Wednesday afternoons at 2:00. Ranching Out FYI hosts a finance Q&A session for an hour, 2:00 Mountain. And so that is another opportunity to get on if you have questions about how to use QuickBooks or how to do your accounting. We're on there for an hour and we discuss topics. Usually in both of those, we bring some topics to discuss. Wally usually does like a 15-minute presentation at the beginning of each Q&A period. If we have enough questions, we can fill the whole hour. But a lot of times we start with kind of what's going on, what are the questions we're seeing regularly in each of those cases, and then what do we want to talk about. If you also will look at the ranching.fyi website, you'll see upcoming sell-by schools. Please don't be confused. Those are called the Sim to Win schools, are marketing schools. We are teaching using that simulation process. There's no less learning that goes on. We've just changed the format of it. So I want to make sure people are clear about that. They understand that we are teaching sell-by using that simulation process.
Very good.
Good.
Okay. Thank you guys both so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having us. It's a big honor.
Very good stuff there. Really appreciate John and Wally and their expertise and their experience and their wisdom and their wealth of knowledge that they share from their experiences, and just really helpful, encouraging to see what's possible if we're willing to think outside the box. So really enjoyed that. Coming up next on the Working Cows podcast, we will be welcoming back to the podcast Blaine Jerdis. Blaine is a consultant with Understanding Ag, and he's in Saskatchewan, so he knows a thing or two about winter grazing, bale grazing, swath grazing, bunch grazing, stockpile grazing, all those other kinds of strategies to help reduce the input costs of our winter feeding and of our winter feeding. And so we're going to talk to him about that on the next episode of the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you again soon.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.